So again, my name is Aya Hajadova, and I'm a marketing coordinator for college success at Cengage Learning, and we're very honored to have Dr. Constance Staley speak here today. Dr. Constance Staley is a professor of communication at the University of Colorado, where she has directed the freshman seminar program for 20 years. An award-winning teacher, Dr. Staley is the author of a multimedia training package for first-year seminar instructors, as well as the groundbreaking resource manual, 50 Ways to Leave Your Lectern. A well-known name, first-year experience circles, Dr. Staley is a leader in instructor workshop training nationwide. During a 3-year leave from the University of Colorado, Dr. Staley joined an East Coast Fortune 500 company to design and deliver its management and supervisory training. She also represented the university as a Fulbright Fellow, teaching in the former Soviet Union in 1996. Dr. Staley received a BA in Education from Ball State University and an MA in Linguistics and PhD in Communication from the University of Colorado, Boulder. She's the author of Cengage Learning's Focus series and the co-author of Focus on College and Career Success with Steve Staley. So with that being said, I will let Dr. Staley take it away.
Thank you so much, Aya, and greetings, colleagues. Thank you for deciding to spend the next hour with me today so that we can learn together. This session is entitled, These Kids Today, How Do They Learn? How Can We Reach Them? And you notice that the word kids is in quotation marks because I don't think age is really necessarily a factor here. If you teach non-traditional students, much of what I'm going to talk about today also applies. And if you teach traditional students in terms of age, it also works that way too. We, in our own family, tease, our daughters are well into adulthood, and we tease about inviting our daughters and their cell phones over for dinner. So I have a lot to talk with you about, and I'm excited to share what I've learned recently. How do they learn? How can we reach them? So this is where I am, the University of Colorado at Colorado Springs. There's our webpage, Inspiration Everywhere You Turn, and in particular, there's a great deal of inspiration in my new office, which is the corner office in a new building, and that's the reward that you get after having been with an institution for 40 years, evidently. People ask me frequently, when are you going to retire? And my thought is, I'm still having a good time and I'm still learning, so not quite yet. But sooner or later, I imagine. But there's so much to learn, and I'm having a good time doing it. I am the author, as Aya said, of the Focus series, and as I write, I continue to learn. The Community College book is the newest edition. There are new editions almost continually, it seems to me, like in the works, but I do learn so much from that, and I have learned more about my students by testing things on them and getting their input and trying out activities and so forth. If we're talking about traditional students, they are described as a generation on a tightrope. And what do we know about them? They're digital natives, yet they're living in a largely analog world. We know that they don't want to be treated as children, yet they're very tied, at least many of them, to their parents. These are generalizations, but recognizable to most of us. They're coming of age in a tough economy, yet they're eager to enjoy a rapid rise in the working world. Coming in as a junior vice president would be ideal. They have 241 Facebook friends on average, but are often uncomfortable face-to-face. And so Levine and Dean say they're unprepared for the world that they will enter. And maybe you've recognized that. I've certainly seen a lot of change over the 40 years that I've been in higher education. We could get into a big conversation about who's to blame for any of that, but I don't think that's as important as trying to figure out ways to get inside students' heads and understand how they prefer to learn. And this picture represents a story in Generation on a Tightrope in which two roommates were having a fairly vicious fight, but there was no noise at all. There was not a sound because the entire conversation was happening on their cell phones, even though they were back to back. So the one thing that I think is important in all of that, and much of it is important, but is that growing up as digital natives may, as we're beginning to realize, have some effects on social skills, on the ability to read nonverbal cues, and on willingness to interact. I have seen some of that most recently in my own students. I had a student in the fall who on the first day of class introduced himself as a sociopath, but said that really he didn't think that was that bad of a deal because, you know, he could deal with it. I thought that was interesting, and I had some conversations with him and with the counseling center about that, and we decided that there was a great deal of social awkwardness there, and the student had decided to use a label to let people know that this is who he was and this is how he was going to interact with them, which was not much at all. So I think that's something to think about as we look at how students learn. If you're like me, you probably just began a new term, and the research says that we have concerns at the beginning of a new term, but so do students. For example, you walk into a new class and you may think things like this. Are these students going to like me? Are we going to have good rapport? And these are the very same questions that are at the forefront of students' minds. This research comes out of physics, and I think the sciences are to be applauded for some of the things that they're writing about active learning and about engaging students. And this, in particular, one of the authors is Carl Wyman, who is a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, but is very, very interested in physics education, and that's a wonderful thing. So as we began our new terms, just recently, I wanted to open the chat box and ask all of you to take a minute and answer this question. If you have something you would like to share and contribute, there's probably a great deal of expertise on this WebEx, and I'd like to hear from you. And I'm going to open this up, and let's see if we can have this go to everyone. And if you have something to add, if you would please just type it in, and maybe you can help me with this, Aya. I don't see everyone as a possibility, and maybe you've already taken care of that. There it is. Thank you. So if you have something you would like to contribute, what teaching strategies have you tried recently, perhaps, that successfully reach today's students? Take a moment, and as things scroll by, I'll read some of your contributions because I'm interested in what you're learning as well. I'll give you a minute to think and type.
So guys, just a reminder, please send the message to everyone. I'm getting a few messages sent to me privately, but I'll read them out loud. Connie, if that's okay with you?
Sure.
All right, so I got one from Lauren. She says trivia games in class. Julie says multimedia materials like YouTube. Let's see. Students love the write on the board. The more colored markers they have access to, the better. This is from Christine.
Okay.
Showing YouTube videos to my students as a way to begin discussion seems to work. And we're getting a couple of them sent to everyone.
To everyone, yes. I
Yep.
flip the classroom, okay, and during class we debate, we go through games and other kinds of active learning tasks. Okay, quizzes using the phone, good. Good. All right, let's see if a couple more come through from Jennifer. Giving the students time to journal and collect their thoughts helps. Excellent. Project-based learning, such as a case study to discuss and solve, seems to be effective. All right, excellent. I'm going to go ahead and strategic cell phone use. Quick research, good. Wonderful. Well, I'm going to close the box now, and let's go ahead and talk about some of these things. I'm glad we're all interested in finding things that will work. I want to start today by talking about the VARK, and I want to talk about it in a different way and give you some new ways to think about it, because I'm beginning to understand some things about learning styles versus learning preferences, and I know that probably many of you are familiar with the VARK, and I think it's a good tool. I think that we are in a period of time right now where, at least I am, and I expect you are too, between a rock and a hard place. And here's what I mean by that. We have this repertoire of new tools. Wow, so many things we can do in class, but it seems more difficult to get engagement from the students. Or think about it this way, we're involved in a higher education system that emphasizes particular ways of learning, but on the other hand, students may not prefer to learn in those ways. And so that forces us to be strategic, to think of things that will work, to experiment, and to do things differently perhaps than we have in the past. I have a theory about multitasking, and I know I've done a lot of thinking about it, a lot of reading and writing about it. I think one of the reasons why this is such an issue is because of what I'm going to talk about today. Part of it is that students are very hands-on and get bored very, very quickly. We try things like, banning certain kinds of multitasking distractions in the classroom, and we have varied levels of success. But I've been thinking about some new ways to do this. I'm not positive what the results would be, but it might be worth a try. So, for example, could class be a cell-free zone? There might be some resistance to that early on, but if you had a clear shoe hanger and you had everybody's names labeled and people put their cell phones there at the beginning of class and could see them and be reassured, and you could use this also to take roll, could that be a good thing? Later on, would students realize that this had been very effective and appreciated after all? There is some research that says that just the appearance of a cell phone can be distracting. So just having it out on the desk, or if you're at a lectern or something at the front of the room or a podium or whatever, having your phone visible can be distracting. It's almost like, to me, having a pack of cigarettes out, if you're trying to break the habit. So think about something like that, or something that I have done, and I've had really good results. I talk to students about the literature that says that if you take notes on a laptop, you will not be as academically successful as you would be if you hand wrote your notes, and that's because of this brain-hand coordination, et cetera. And I can show them that research. It's also the fact that I know the research that says that if students are multitasking on a laptop as opposed to taking notes, that is even more distracting to the students who can see that than it is to the student who is actually taking the notes, or on Facebook, or doing email or shopping or whatever on the laptop. So what I've started to do, and it's working pretty well, is I've said to students, even though I would much rather have you with me in class than see the backs of all these silver screens out in front of me, if you are going to take notes on a laptop, my only condition is that at the end of class you send me those notes so that I can make sure that we're on the same page and I can learn from you. And students have been doing that. The students who aren't interested in doing that don't bring their laptops again. But the students who are, it's a very good way to communicate with students and actually cover material in a secondary fashion. I've also had fun asking my students about their relationship with their cell phone, and this is interesting because it comes from another Cengage author who gave me permission to use this activity. I had students take their cell phones out. I had them trace their cell phones, put it down on blank paper, trace the outer edges. I had them sketch inside, all the apps that were showing on their phone, what their screen actually looked like. I had them give their cell phones a nickname, so, they had names for their cell phones. And after taking them through a variety of mindless activities like that, which they did very willingly, I asked them to give their cell phone to the person to the right to hold on to until the end of class. And at that point, of course, they freaked out and said, no, we can't do that. One student clasped her cell phone to her chest and said, but this is my happy place. And so, these are very strong relationships, but I want to talk later about some of the things that I think we can do about that. I am certainly not anti-technology. In fact, I'm kind of a junkie. I really enjoy it, but I think our responsibility is to teach our students conscious computing, it's sometimes called, when to have it on, when to have it off. That's why I love the comment in the chat box about strategic use of cell phones in class. Call it code switching, call it whatever you want, but I think this is partly our responsibility to teach students how to handle this as opposed to just simply exclude it or ban technology in the classroom. So the VARK questionnaire has been around for a while. Neil Fleming is a wonderful educator from New Zealand who really began the instrument, and some of you probably use it in class. It's a quick, I would call it a quick learning style instrument, but I want to qualify that a little bit today in terms of my new understanding of it. The VARK says that we have these 4 ways of learning: visual, oral, read-write, and kinesthetic. And so there's also, of course, the onion has a take on everything. It's been around for a while, but I thought it was very funny, and I've never forgotten it. It had an article about olfactory learners. Parents of nasal learners demand odor-based curriculum. I don't know if you're chuckling or not because I can't hear you, but I thought this was kind of a poking fun at what we're talking about today. So what the VARK says is that some of us are visual learners. We respond to symbols and charts and diagrams and color and layout. And so these are the students who color code their notes, and everything is organized spatially, so there's a notebook for each class, or they can do this kind of thing online as well. Some of us are oral in that we really can learn through lectures, discussions, study groups, email, and chats. Neil Fleming puts in this category because they're conversational. Read-write, the textbooks, papers, note-taking, these are strategies that are less popular, at least in my view over the last 40 years. They've become less and less popular with students. And then kinesthetic, so reality-based, using all the senses, analogies, case studies, some of the things you were putting in the chat box, simulations, YouTubes, things like that, which I think are gaining in popularity, which is a good thing because this category of learners is also gaining in popularity. Now, I was attracted to the VARK because for me and my own personal ways of learning, it's very, very clear. And you would expect that somebody in communication would be an oral learner. I also happen to be, as I said, a tech junkie, and I love PowerPoint and all those sorts of tools. But going back to, my childhood, my parents have said that they actually had to put a blanket over the side of the crib and get on all fours and crawl out of the bedroom so that I wouldn't hear and wake up. That's pretty extreme, but as a child, when we had tests in school, standardized tests, in those days, there was a category called listening, in which the test administrator would read a passage and then have you answer questions, in addition to reading-based questions and math-based questions, etc. And oral was always my very, very top score. And so to me, it was very clear. But I want us to think about it in a different way. And this is my point. What we're talking about here are not so much pigeonholes or stereotypes or exclusive categories so that a student could say to you, well, I'm sorry, but I can't learn this because I'm a visual learner and I don't think you're a visual enough teacher. But instead to talk about learning preferences instead of learning styles, and preferences being directly linked to motivation. If you think about it that way, it makes a difference. What I'm most interested, of course, in talking about learning styles is the whole reflective piece and the metacognitive piece, so that students really begin thinking about this question: how do I prefer to learn? And that's something they perhaps haven't thought about before. I taught a preterm class last week, and it was a whole semester in a week. It was from 9 to 5:30 every day. It was a long haul, but there was so much variety and so much participation and action and interaction that the week absolutely flew by. But one thing I did on the midterm, and this might be something that you'd want to think about, these students had 2 papers to write. They had a group presentation. They had an 8-page midterm on Wednesday, a 10-page final on Friday. So this was a lot of work. They had the syllabus and the major assignments for about 6 weeks in advance. Major amount of work, but the subtext on the midterm and the final were, you may line through, out of 100 questions, you may line through 5 that you don't want to be counted. However, you must tell me why. And I didn't understand this topic, would be an okay answer. This was a tricky question, Professor Staley, wouldn't. But I wanted to learn things about their learning process through the week, especially since it was so intensive, and those courses are called on my campus intensive courses, and they are intensive. But the students can really, really focus when they know that's all they're going to do, and there aren't going to be distractions. So what they had to do on the exams was figure out some things about the way they learned and communicate that to me. They also had, say, 8 essay questions to choose from, and they could decide how to spend those points. If they wanted to put all the points for the essays on one question, they could do that, although they knew it had to be a very good answer. Or they could ration them out. But I think metacognition should be the subtext in anything we teach, whether it's a first-year seminar, a discipline-based course, or whatever. We all know that it's important to vary our learning styles, and so I think we've all gotten to the point where we're really mixing it up in class, and I saw this in the chat box as well. And so in terms of visual, you know, I'm really interested in a number of these things, but I'm also teaching my students not just PowerPoint and Prezi, but Sway, which is a new tool, very interesting if you're teaching public speaking, because students can pull in their written outlines as a Word document and then get rid of things and create a presentation very, very quickly, a very attractive and convincing presentation. Or things like Haiku Deck, which I really recommend you take a look at if you haven't seen it already. eMaze, there are so many tools coming out that are visual that it's sort of mind-boggling, but to me very exciting and fun. So we all, of course, do lecturettes, and we realize now that they shouldn't be an hour long, that, you know, there's something called the fanny factor, and among other things, and we need to really break it up. Music is interesting to me. I often build it into PowerPoints because I don't know where the rule ever came from that we couldn't use music in class. I find it strategically interesting and important. And then lots of kinesthetic opportunities. And I'll show you some of these today which you may or may not be familiar with. But we know it's important to vary learning styles, and I think we're doing a much better job of that. What Neil Fleming says is that in higher education, this is what the average classroom looks like. We have about 2/3 multimodal learners, meaning that they are flexible. We have really one student who fits into his category of visual. We have this fairly large category of oral and read-write, which is what we emphasize in higher education. You read the text, you listen to the lecture, you read the text, you listen to the lecture, you take the test, and something in that order. But then we have a large group here of kinesthetic hands-on learners. And I would venture to guess that most of these multimodal learners in that 2/3 group have a K somewhere in their profile they prefer. In fact, they're itching to learn in a hands-on manner. That is their preference. And so my question is, what can we do about that, especially considering the fact that many of us prefer reading and writing. That's the way we were schooled, and so we are carrying on those traditions. But what else can we do? So if about 60% or 2/3 of the students are multimodal, there's good news and bad news. They should use all their preferences to truly feel confident that they have learned something. And that's another reason why varying our teaching strategies for today's students is so very important. The other thing that I think is largely our responsibility is teaching students translation skills. In other words, how to switch modalities or switch preferences. You can't always have preferences delivered to you by a teacher, and so you may have to adapt things to into your own preferences in order to really learn them. And I think we can help students learn how to do that. In other words, learn how to customize their learning just like they customize things that they really care about. So, for example, I finally broke down and got a new cell phone. I got one that was too big for my hands and had to take it back and pay the restocking fee. Darn it. But then, boy, did I pick the exact cover that I wanted for it, the color. I right away put an image on it, and that's an image of somebody who's very important in my life, and got my music downloaded, so when I wake up to an alarm, it's always going to be Viva La Vida, because I really like that song, and I find it very energizing and motivating in the morning. So here are these visual learners. They really prefer, and they can make sense out of things that are interesting visually, whether they're images, pictures, graphs, charts, diagrams. These things make sense to them, and they feel compelled and motivated when information is presented that way. So something like this, which might take me a long time to create, would really be something that would appeal to my visual learners, because it's neatly categorized and put in boxes and organized into categories. For a kinesthetic learner, this probably would have very little appeal at all and be demotivating. The oral people, as I think of myself, we love lectures. We can listen to people talk all day. We like podcasts. We like webinars, emails and texts because they're conversational. And so then we compare that with the lessening group of people who really prefer to read, and you can see that everywhere. You can see textbooks that can be read to you. You can see online, you know, when you just simply float between, click the arrow, and the next graphic comes up with kind of minimal information, but lots of well, that would be visual actually, but things are presented less in read-write fashion. That's what I'm getting at here, and more visual because the society is really going in that direction. What I did in this week-long class last week was very interesting to me because we did so many different kinds of activities. Teaching a semester in a week really forces a faculty member to think about what's important and what are the best strategies for getting those points across. We did a lot of role plays. We didn't call them role plays. We called them improv. And the students were totally involved in those and did a very, very good job with them. But every single day and every morning and every afternoon was drastically different in terms of the many, many things that we did to prolong the engagement. So here's one thing I thought I might like to talk with you about. Some of these you will know about, and some of these might be new to you, but the opportunity we have now to use e-tools to engage these kinesthetic learners. So, for example, I really like to use iJots, and I don't know if any of you use iJots. It's video mail in a blink. I could take you to the website, but I'll just show you an example instead. And what I have found is that while I could write the very same thing in a written email, that this is what comes up in the student's email, and all they do is click on the play button, and there I am for 2 minutes talking about our last class coming up. And they'll watch the whole thing, and it's a very personal kind of message, and I'm just sitting there, you know, across the screen from them, and we have a connection. If you've not tried iJots, and you can also save an iJot as an MP4 file, it's a great way to communicate with your students. They really, really like it. Some of you talked about using live audience participation. So, for example, Poll Everywhere, which has just been updated again, can do more. And if you've not tried online polling with cell phones, that's a fun way to get students engaged and to be able to watch in real time who thinks what or which answer is correct, or to do many, many things in class. If you've never tried GoAnimate, that's an interesting opportunity too. It does require that you buy an educational license if you're going to use it on in a broad kind of a setting. You can do things but not save them otherwise. But it's an interesting way to make difficult concepts understandable. But again, I don't do this. The instructor doesn't do this. The students do this. And so by manipulating all of these tools, and the tools are really miraculous, I think, they can begin to understand things that they probably or possibly might not be able to understand in simply written text. So this is something that you might want to think about trying. And if you haven't, just Google it and play around for a while and see what you think. The other thing which you may or may not know about is Remind, and used to be called Remind 101, but you can text your students, but they can't text back, so you don't get 100 texts back asking you, how long should that paper be, or what was it you said again about this assignment. So this can be a great way to communicate with your students broadly, and they will respond to those texts in terms of taking action and doing whatever it is you're requesting or reminding them about. So we have different categories here, e-tools for kinesthetic learners, and some opportunities. If you've not used Wordle, that can be fun as well. Or Tagxito is an alternative that gives you more possibilities. I always recommend that students put their papers into Wordle and see which words come up the most by the size of the word cloud that's formed. Or another suggestion is to put your syllabus into Wordle and see what words in your syllabus come up as the largest. One person in a workshop did that once and was actually horrified to see that the largest word in her word cloud from her syllabus was the word don't, and decided right then and there that her syllabus needed to be a little bit more welcoming. It could still be structured and it could still be firm, but that it needed to be more positive and more hopeful in terms of the way students would respond to it. So infographics, which we can teach students how to make. The simulations that I talked about in my class last week, some of them were 2 to 3 hours long and actually had to be stopped. And then a lot of time spent on debriefing because the students were so very engaged. So lots and lots of opportunities to do more than ever before. One thing I've had lots of success with doing recently is putting students into blog groups. And so, for example, in one of my communication classes, students are in one of 4 blog groups. They can go to either Inc., and this is a course that's related to organizational communication, but I can see lots and lots of different applications for it. So one group goes to Inc., finds an article to read, ties it back to the class content via a blog, their own blog posting. Or one group goes to Harvard Business Review, one group goes to Fast Company, and so many things in our culture break first on Fast Company. It's a very exciting place for them to search. And I once had one group go to TED Talks, although that was very popular because that was preferred to actually reading. But once they get into this, I find that their blogs are much longer and more responsive, more attuned to the course content than a paper might be. In fact, they'll write more because it's their response, it's their reflection. And if there's one thing that I think our students need, it's more opportunities and more time to reflect. It's very, very difficult in today's society to find time for that. So if they're going to Fast Company, they might lock in on an article, How to Make Yourself Unforgettable. And so often these are based on research, even though this is popular media, and write about that in terms of something related to college success or even a future career. If it's a leadership class, for example, here's an Inc. article on the 4 leadership lessons from Game of Thrones that might be very appealing to students. Here's something from the HuffPost, how to get paid more at your first job. So when you're doing a unit about college majors and careers, you know, having students go find something they're interested in, bring it back to the course, and write at the same time is, I think, very worthwhile. This is an interesting article, Why Blogging is Key to the Future of Higher Education. So lots to think about in terms of this particular tool, and I imagine lots of you have tried it, but what I like to do is have blog leaders do roundtable discussions in class based on the posts in their group that week. And so they are, this is an assignment that is totally VARKed. It is visual, it is oral, it is read-write, it is kinesthetic, it is everything. And it is often highly effective, and students remember these things after they leave the course. Another thing I've had a lot of success with is having students in teams choose a book. In this particular class, these are New York Times business bestsellers. They pull out the contents of the book and train the rest of the class on whatever lessons there are to be learned from that particular book. So you see books here that you're probably familiar with, How to Deliver a TED Talk, The Power of Habit, for example. But this is a great tool for having students make some choices but still do some very, very important summarizing, integrating, synthesizing, some really pretty high-level Bloom's taxonomy strategies. So there are some things for you to think about. Why I like to do these things, and if you know the focus books, you know that there's an infrastructure built in based on a study that was done at Purdue that found these 4 factors to be key to intrinsic motivation. So curiosity. So can I go and do I have some control to follow my interests in terms of these kinds of blogging or reading assignments? Can I tie this somehow to my own future? Can I adjust the level of challenge so that I'm going to work hard, but at the same time I'm going to gain some things that are going to be extremely useful to me? Now, let me emphasize that not everything that we can do for kinesthetic learners has to be online, has to use an e-tool. This is something that I've included in my instructor's manuals, a passport to learning. I did it last week in my intensive class. I had an index card box at the front of the room, and every day behind the tab for their own names, they were to file an index card filled front and back with notes from that day's reading. Now, what that does, it's optional for them. They don't have to do it. But what that does is when they do it, and they did, in fact, sometimes I have to go and get a second box because there's so many cards in it. But what it does is up the quality of the discussion and the interaction because everybody is on the same page. Everybody is prepared, and the bonus for them is that on the final exam then, on Friday or during a regular semester, I hand them their stack of cards from the entire course to use on the final. So what they're doing, in essence, is sort of creating their own cheat sheets, which are legal in this case, and but very, very effective in terms of visual, oral, read, write, and kinesthetic strategies to use in a class. This is something else that I did, and we did this as we prepared for reviews for the midterm and the final. We did visible quizzes, and you know this tool as well if you happen to be a focus user. Everybody has a set of cards, A, B, C, D, however you're going to do it, true, false. And then I have students work in groups and flash a question on the screen. This is sort of a low-cost way of doing clickers. And then they talk amongst themselves and on cue hold up the card that they think represents the correct answer. And then we can talk about it. And they're talking about it in their groups, their little review groups. And so, again, we have this redundancy in terms of learning preferences. And I think that is really key. Or here's another possible question based on what we've been talking about in the last few minutes. Most college classrooms emphasize, and of course the correct answer is C, the oral, lecture, and read-write textbook exam learning style. So that's a tool that you might want to use with your kinesthetic learners, which is most, if not practically all of them. I also like to have them do their own case study about themselves, and they, in this case, would model it after the case studies in focus, and they would write about themselves, and they would insert their own pictures and things that are important to them and personalize the information in the textbook. So again, it's a multimodal kind of activity that's going to use a variety of learning preferences and a very good way of previewing the kinds of difficulties they could find themselves in that particular semester, especially if it's their first semester of college, but a very effective way of getting them to be engaged. And I could tell you some great stories about this assignment if we had the opportunity. So what's important to me is this ability to focus. And one definition that I ran across recently that really spiked my interest was this, that focus is stress without anxiety. Stress without anxiety. Think about that and see if you agree. I think it's an interesting approach. What I've been doing lately, and I think this is absolutely key, is doing a lot of mindfulness work with my students. And I work with a geographer, and we taught the last 2 falls, we've taught a course called Headspace. Fills up very quickly because the students realize that mindfulness is an issue. We know that it's an issue because their cell phones are going to be buzzing all day long. And so we define mindfulness as paying attention to your attention intentionally. Kind of a catchy definition. But the first thing we did was, before we really even introduced the topic to any extent whatsoever, we sent them off alone with their cell phones and had them video themselves with their ideas of what mindfulness was before we told them what we thought it was. And it was a great way to, A, learn their names on the first day of class. We instructors just watched them privately, but also to get sort of a thermostat reading on exactly where they were on this topic. Mindfulness is a big issue right now in healthcare, for example, in relationships, for example. We have mindful commuting while you're sitting there in this parking lot in the mornings. We have mindful parenting. We have industry. This is a huge topic in industry, in sports teams, in the military, in higher education. And so if we can introduce this and perhaps lead in with this topic, even in our first-year seminars, and you're 18 or 19 or you're a returning student and you're getting a handle on this concept early on, how powerful is that? Next year, we will do our mindfulness course as a 1-week intensive, as a kind of a retreat format, and then have some regular one-on-one meetings with the students throughout the term. So mindfulness is focus plus, as we defined it in class, positivity plus resilience. And we know that learning requires focus. So we approached it both in terms of science and in terms of spirituality, not so much spirituality as in a specific type of religion or anything like that, but really just getting in touch with self and that reflective piece that I talked about. Here's something I wanted to let you know about. You may not have heard about it, but it's a new tool. It's called Aspire, and I am not on commission, but I have one. And it's a small, rechargeable tool that you clip on a strap or on your waistband, and it monitors a variety of physical factors and respiration and so forth, and is linked then to your iPhone and will send you messages that say things like, Connie, it seems like you're experiencing some anxiety right now. It might be a good time to take some deep breaths, or try this strategy, or try this strategy. I wish I had a grant where I could buy one of these for each one of my students, but it's something I wanted to try because I think it could be a good tool. And this person on their website says she was the most calm she had been in 10 years. It's not an audible buzz, only you are aware, but it calls you back, I should say, and it makes you think about your attention. We told our students that you're the only person who can control that stress. You're the person who can read and reflect and write and meditate and explore and apply. In this Headspace class, I have to tell you, and this is just a personal aside, I lost my mother last semester during the course, and these students were so empathetic and so comforting to me. It was absolutely incredible. My mother's funeral was across the country, and somehow they found out where it was. I have no idea how. They took up a collection and they sent flowers, and on the note it said, "You are in our thoughts and meditations." And I thought that was a beautiful thing for these young students to do. We know that last year's SERP report said that depression and anxiety, all these things are becoming more and more of an issue for today's first-year students. If you Google UCLA's SERP report, or the American Freshman, this is from the New York Times, and so the report on last fall's freshmen should be coming out in about the date that you see up there in 2016, feeling overwhelmed. So I'm interested in all of this. I'm interested in, and this is what I'm going to be speaking about at the First Year Experience Conference. I'm doing a presentation with my husband and sometimes co-author. I second that emotion, the non-cognitive puzzle of college success. And you can bet there's going to be some music at the beginning of that presentation. Daniel Goleman wrote something very interesting recently. He said we need to break down the walls between what we think of as academic intelligence and emotional intelligence. Because our brains ignore those barriers, they're certainly not compartmentalized. If you're upset, he says, it shrinks your working memory. You can't pay attention to the teacher. You can't learn. So I think some of these terms are misnomers in a sense, and I think that learning style preferences or learning preferences is directly linked to motivation. I really believe this quote, if I don't want to spoon feed my students, I have to let them hold the spoon. Because what I've noticed is if I do the work, I learn. And sometimes I'm frustrated then, ironically, because they're not learning. If they do the work, they learn. As I said, I think they're actually eager to do the work. They really want to learn in a hands-on way. And the more we can let them do that and all the while monitor, guide, coach, all the other things that we're all good at doing, the better. Motivation, we're beginning to understand, is more than carrots and sticks. It's actually, according to a study published in Scientific American, it's based on these three factors, and this goes back to those 4 C's I talked about of intrinsic motivation, the study out of Purdue. You can see some direct linkages here. Autonomy, can I follow some of my own interests, at least some of them? Do I value what I'm doing? Is it not really busy work, but it has value for me? And am I good at it, or can I get good at it? And that, again, is linked to learning preferences, because that's what I prefer and that's what I can probably do well at. In my classes, my goal is to have so much action and interaction that there's no time for distraction. I don't always achieve that. I don't think anyone would or could, but it's a goal, and it's an important goal to me. The other goal, and let me use this as an analogy, is this. If you're hungry, this might look like a really good meal, and as a matter of fact, it does to me. But how would this be? Even if it's good, it gets tedious, it gets tiresome. So the extent to which we can mix it up, we can do different things, we can keep people motivated and engaged, the better. Like you, I'm interested in high impact. So what I do with focus is I have my students on the very first day of class fill out the entrance interview. It's longer than this. It's several pages long. The next week during class, they come to my office for one-on-one meetings, and we go over this interview. Then on the last day of class, or shortly before that, I give them the exit interview. It's correlated. They fill that out. Then they get the entrance interview back, and they write a paper on how they've changed over the course of the semester. This is what one student wrote, and it's a lot of text, so I'm going to gray out some things that are not as important in my view. But here's what Victoria wrote. She talks about how terrified she was at the beginning of her first semester of college. And she ends up by saying she's really not afraid of just failure anymore. She's mortified of wasting the chance to learn. The realization is, frankly, eye-opening and possibly life-changing. Before seeing my entrance interview next to my exit interview, I thought I hadn't changed in the slightest. What a relief it is to know that I'm not stuck in a perpetual state of wasted potential, and how brilliant that is. When it comes to college success, I want to emphasize you are the key. Absolutely, positively, you are the key, even if you're teaching online. There's no replacement for you. You can do many of the things we've talked about. You can create a personal atmosphere, a dynamic presence. Reach out and touch someone, because there is no replacement for you. What we're doing in first-year seminars in particular is we're teaching the hidden rules for success. And I love this picture. You can find it on the internet. And if you look very, very carefully, you'll see the face of a woman hidden there. It's let me say it this way, it's to the left of center. And some of you probably saw it right away, and some of you are probably still looking for it, and that's okay. But that's one of the things we do in first-year seminars is we point out these hidden rules for success. In what we do, if you teach a first-year seminar like me, we follow the words of Morpheus, the great philosopher, who said there's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path. I don't care if they know what the textbook says on page 212 a month from now, but can they do those things? Can they apply those things? Can they continue the learning? That's what's important, because our aim is student success across the curriculum. That's my aim. And I expect if you're a part of this webinar as well, you agree. So that brings us to the end of our time together. We have a little bit of time left for questions. You're certainly welcome to write in the chat box to me, and we'll collect those questions and respond to them too. If you want to unmute the lines, Aya, that would be great, and we'll see if anybody has a question or a comment. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Staley. I'm going to unmute the lines right now, but if there is any noise, I will mute them. But you can unmute yourself as well by pressing #6. But I'll mute the lines right now, and let's test the waters.
Thank you.
The leader has unmuted your line. The leader has muted your line. To unmute your line, press #6.
Yeah, there's a lot of noise, but everyone, you can feel free to unmute your line if you have any questions by pressing #6. Connie, I think I may have muted you as well, so go ahead and press #6. It looks like you're not muted, actually. Let's see.
There.
Great. So Julie is asking for the email address. It's blocked right now.
I see that.
See it.
Yeah. It is CSTALEY uccs.edu. So that's cstaley at uccs.edu. Thank you for putting it up there.
No questions yet on the chat box. So let's give it another minute and see if anyone else has any questions. Connie, there's a question from Jennifer. She's saying, is your first year college success course required where you teach?
Yes, it is required. As of an 84% positive vote of the faculty several years ago, we had about 85% of the students taking the course, and so it wasn't far to get that last 15 or so percent, and we felt like those were some of the students who could benefit most, perhaps. So it is required. It is the first Gen Ed course. It's called Gateway Program Seminar, GPS, which is a wonderful metaphor for navigating your way through college, learning how to do that. Well, thank you, Jennifer.
And how many credits is it?
It is 3 credits.
All right, let's give it a few more seconds, and if there's nothing, I guess we could part ways.
I saw a message. It looked like Kathleen was speaking.
Kathleen?
No. Here she is.
I don't see anything from Kathleen.
Well, anyone, feel free to email me or send me or type something in the chat box, and I will reply.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Staley, for facilitating this session, and thank you all for attending. You'll all receive a follow-up email within a week that will include a link to the recording of this session. You can also access additional resources for yourself and your students through the digital course support website. And let's see, I think we had a comment from Marsha. She said that she really likes your idea about note-taking on laptops. Having students submit their notes keeps them on track and helps the instructor to become aware of any issues with learning material. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Marsha. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining me today. And I'd love to hear from you, and have a great semester.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Staley, and all have a great rest of the week, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.